Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 31. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. So somebody asked me a question that I wanted to bring to the show, and that is, when should you consider using a third-party management tool rather than just the ones that are built into your cloud of choice?
So specifically here, are we thinking about things like Datadog versus using CloudWatch or Azure Log Analytics?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, when you have Sense, you don't use CloudWatch because it sucks in all cases. So all the time you consider third-party tools if you're considering CloudWatch. Beyond that, no, it's an interesting question.
Well, you say this, right? But there are also trade-offs if you're thinking about, I don't want to dive too deeply into it, but if you think about logs, for example, and you're shipping those to Datadog, they have to go to CloudWatch to then be shipped to Datadog to then be indexed anyway. So you're paying twice or three times, depending on how you do the indexing in Datadog. So at that point, would you put up with the questionable UX of CloudWatch logs in order to save money? Or would you still rather have a centralized platform? Those are the kinds of things, I guess, that this question is getting at.
I find it interesting you confidently said it's like 2 times the price. Every time I've used Datadog, the pricing has been absolutely so obscure and confusing. I just know I have this massive bill at the end of the month I need to justify, and I can never get a great answer as to why it costs that much. So, yeah, you make a good point about costs, absolutely.
Sometimes you don't really have a choice. Sometimes if you're like in a multi-cloud environment, then it makes sense to have one single pane of glass, and the UX and developer experience is worth that price.
Well, so for example, I've worked with customers before that despite using AWS for the compute of their workload, their company has been pretty heavily in the Azure space for other workloads and therefore are pretty bought into Azure Log Analytics and some of those monitoring and metric services in Azure. So they've opted to go and ship their logs and metrics over to Azure, which I guess is a third-party logging tool. And their reasoning behind doing that is that's where our company's logs live.
Yeah, I can certainly see you easily growing into that, right? Certainly if you started with one cloud provider and you trained your people up and started building your tooling and everything around that, and then you wanted to add a second cloud, then doing that might make a lot of sense, particularly as some of the clouds are making that easier with stuff like the Azure Arc and all the rest that mean you can plug in other clouds into your environment.
Particularly for data in general, like logs especially, like putting that all in one place can save you a lot of headaches just if there's like data retention laws or access control you need to put around that. Like doing it all in one place can make life easier. So if you're multi-cloud, then yeah, pick a cloud and do it that way, or pick a third party that solves your needs better.
Yeah, like I've had great luck in the past with using Graylog or the Elastic Stack for logging stuff, and it doesn't matter then where the workload's running. We just ship the logs there and don't really think about it, and Graylog or Elastic is the place we go for that.
Yeah, and a lot of people are already running like Prometheus, Grafana, that kind of stack. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Look at you coming in here with your modern workloads and modern stacks, and I'm here talking about Graylog.
Oftentimes, cloud-specific vendors might sell me on their tooling because being cloud native means that you will get all the latest and greatest benefits from it. And a lot of the third-party tooling can be wrappers around what they're already providing. I think there's cases where that's true, and I think there's cases where that's not true. Has anyone got any experience with that?
Yeah, like I think AWS were pretty early on in the CloudWatch stack with things like Canaries and Evidently, and also real user management. I think they were fairly early on compared to some providers in terms of maturity. So I've seen a lot of people adopt the native tool to get those kind of feature sets where real user management and stuff like that has been important to them.
I can certainly see people doing identity management externally to the clouds. That's a pretty logical one to me anyway, that you would have outside of your cloud. But I also see that you could do it the other way around if you're just plugging what was mainly developed in one cloud into the others. I suppose Intra ID as it is now, the old Azure AD had such a big market share anyway that's kind of an exception to that normal rule, in that they have a lot of people tying into that because it's Intra ID.
Yeah, that's pretty common, right? I see a lot of people using things like G Suite's OAuth implementation for that. Okta, I guess, is a big one there. So that is a pretty common one. I don't think there are many people purely just using IAM, for example, to authenticate to AWS. At least if they are, they probably ought not to be.
So it sounds like it really comes down to the individual product that we're looking at. We gave logs as an example. We gave IAM as an example. And I imagine that also extends to other services like database services. Everyone has a database as a service that you can rent for, like, Redis example. Redis has their own service. Was it called Atlas, I think?
That's the Mongo one.
That's the Mongo one.
Yeah. I evaluated Mongo Atlas actually, and it looked like a good product when I needed it for the previous role, but it ended up needing VPC peering to like connect into it at the time, and that was like a big no-no. So we ended up having to go with AWS at the time just for data restrictions like that.
Yeah, I think databases are a really interesting one, right? Because they're usually API compatible with something open source or something that's available cross-cloud. So for me, you would have to have a really compelling use case, not just to use the one your cloud provider has, because data portability feels like it's not so much of an issue maybe when it comes to databases. Then again, I suppose there are strong reasons for using your cloud provider's native one for certain engines, like Aurora, for example. AWS have their whole own storage engine that they've built behind that, and there's a bunch of features there that don't exist anywhere else. There's a bunch of performance optimizations there that would be difficult to use in other clouds. So maybe there is a strong argument there for choosing that native service over something third party. And I guess even stuff like database auth can be handled for you with things like roles rather than usernames and passwords and things.
There's some that are sort of in the middle, aren't there? Like, I believe that Microsoft has quite a lot of Postgres developers on staff. So, they've invested quite a bit in the Postgres stack. But, you can kind of pick and choose some of the database offerings from the different clouds.
Is there any like third parties you'd go to bat for and say, I really think this is worth the effort to like integrate into our systems and deal with all the headaches? Like it's way better than the cloud's alternatives. I can't really think of many. Datadog is really good, despite the pricing. But that's about the only one I can really think of.
What about security vendors? I mean, those ones come up quite a lot, don't they? That's one where I see a lot of people who have their preferred security vendor, whether that's something like Wiz or Tenable or whatever, where they are putting it across their entire estate, multi-cloud or whatever.
I think that's predominantly because a lot of the services the cloud providers have just aren't that good. If you think about something like Trusted Advisor, it just is sort of that lowest bar of things that you should be doing, but doesn't have any context around your workload. Maybe you've got a third-party agent installed on your EC2 instances to block inbound and outbound connections, and therefore you don't care that port 22 is allowed from anywhere in your security group because you're handling that at a host level. It just seems to me that a lot of those native tools are nowhere near as intelligent as something like Wiz or Tenable or Illumio at doing that stuff. So they are an obvious place that I would go and choose some kind of third-party SIEM tool because they're just terrible, frankly. Like, they just give a very high-level set of information.
Yeah, actually, you've sparked some in my mind as well. CI tooling. I've tried to use Code Star and Code Catalyst, and I can't remember the other tools. And
Code Build, Code Deploy, all of those, yeah.
Yeah, the Code Suite. I tried because I think there was some benefits to having it all within AWS, and it just was an awful experience. And it was just much easier to go to GitHub.
I mean, there is something to be said for focus. When you've got companies that are able to focus on adding value above the control plane or whatever, then they've got to be good, or they no longer have a value proposition. I think there can be sometimes a benefit from a more horizontal approach that comes from some of these things. Something that I come across a lot is in pretty boring update management stuff, where you tend to have two groups of people. You either have people who are very focused on one stack or one operating system particularly, and then they take the tooling for that operating system and they use that across all the different clouds in a consistent way, or they take a cloud-centric view and then they use, the Azure tooling or the whatever tooling to do all their updates across all the different operating systems. And I've seen both types of those people who prefer thinking about installing updates from both perspectives, whether it's I'm taking the operating system approach across all clouds or I'm taking the cloud approach across all operating systems.
I guess another one where there's obvious advantages to using a third-party tool is orchestration for those legacy infrastructure workloads. Like Terraform, to me at least, is a way better tool to go and learn the syntax for to deploy an EC2 instance or a virtual machine than going and learning CloudFormation and Azure Resource Manager or whatever the replacement is for that this week, and Oracle's thing and Google's thing. If I can just learn the HCL markup and go and do that in Terraform and store that state somewhere that I choose to, and not have to worry about things like drift detection taking down a bunch of my applications in CloudFormation, which, let's face it, happens quite a lot, then I'm going to choose a third-party tool every time there.
Well, again, that depends on your use cases, doesn't it? And obviously, that's a silly thing to say, but there are times I've seen it had to be used for templates or whatever. If you wanted to tie it into the UI, then it had to be that particular thing. But then, yeah, if you can use Terraform as much as you can and then just wrap it a bit in the cloud-specific stuff, that's an easier option.
Well, this is why I said specifically for those kind of meat and two legacy infrastructure workloads, for want of a better term, like an EC2, an RDS, a VPC. I think for serverless stuff, I would probably choose the native tooling. Things like CDK are actually super powerful for going and deploying serverless workloads and do stuff that Terraform is never going to do because they don't have that level of integration with the cloud provider's native services and APIs.
I think whenever you're talking about a product that is multi-cloud or cloud agnostic, you always at least have the fear that that product is lowest common denominator and there's going to be stuff that you're missing for a particular cloud that you would get if you went for that specific technology, right?
They say that, but I haven't really found that to ever be the case. Have any of you ever seen that where your third-party tool was slow to adopt something and you didn't get that benefit?
I've seen it quite a lot in Terraform, for example, where because it's all community maintained, there's been a new AWS service or a new feature that I'm keen to adopt or keen to at least have a look at, and I don't want to just click ops my way through it, that hasn't existed in the third-party tool. That's a super common one. And yeah, maybe it's 3-6 months before a community member picks up that particular feature and throws a fix into the Terraform module for it.
That's hysterical to me. It sounds like we have very different mindsets, because if I'm looking at adopting a tool, it better have been out long enough to be vetted and have a Terraform API. Otherwise, I probably should be looking at it for production workloads.
Sure, but I might just want to have a play with that feature, right? And I already have a Terraform that goes and deploys my company stack in a dev environment. And I want to see what happens if I go and enable CloudWatch real user monitoring in my company's environment. What kind of information do I get out of that if I do a performance test? What if I want to set up something like Evidently and do some A/B testing? If that feature has been released, but it doesn't exist in Terraform, what am I going to go and deploy the stack into my lab account and then go and click my way through enabling it and then have to backport that stuff into Terraform? That doesn't seem like a feasible thing to do. If I'm going to do it, I want to do it right from the start and have some kind of idea of what does this look like? How does it fit into our release pipelines? Does it break anything else? Is there some kind of race condition in my Terraform setup that I need to be aware of when we go and deploy this? So I get it, but equally, I'm not always looking to just deploy code to production. There are definitely cases where a new feature gets announced at Ignite or something, and I want to go and play with it straight away.
Fair.
I think the other boring thing to think about when you're talking about third-party vendors is procurement. If I'm going to look at a new tool, I'm going to find out whatever company I'm in, how long is it going to take for this to get over the line? How many forms is that third party going to have to fill in? If it's going to be 6 months of me waiting to get this tool, I'll probably sneak whatever log provider my current cloud provider gives me, because that will suck and it will really slow down my desire and ability to deliver on anything.
I mean, I hate to tell you this, Shane, but the cloud providers also know that, and they have their marketplaces where those companies register as a partner, and you could also sneak those procurement items through as a line item on your AWS bill.
I am aware and have done this, and I think that's why they get a lot of basically free money just having it sitting there under the same invoice, because procurement sucks.
And of course, every time that anybody buys something through the cloud marketplaces, they run all of the legal terms that are different for that individual cloud marketplace offering through their legal team and their procurement team and everything, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. No
Totally.
one's just sitting there clicking agree.
I mean, to be fair, I think that's a similar position to where open source has been for so long. You know, there's so many of these cases where, in theory, everyone should have been doing all of the analysis on free stuff they were downloading from everywhere on the internet as well. Should have probably gone through the same legal hoops and everything. But in practice, because people could just download stuff off the internet and install it, that's things that slipped through the procurement net.
I mean, hands up who has read their company's free software policy and still has something GPL3 licensed on their machine.
No comment.
The fact that I don't know that should say a lot about me. Hopefully not.
The advantage of a podcast being, of course, that no one can see who raised any hands.
Yes, officer.
Sold out, damn. One of the other areas I'm always trying to think about is after procurement, once I've gotten that signed off from legal, how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah, and there are various enterprise discount programs with the cloud providers that often stuff that goes through their marketplaces might count towards. I think if you get credits and things thrown at you for proof of concepts, often you can use those to subsidize those purchases. So there are real advantages to just procuring stuff through your cloud provider of choice, even if it is a third-party software as a service offering.
It's a good tip.
The nuances of those benefits do vary by cloud and by what you're trying to buy as well. So you really just have to have a look at it and see what you can get through which ways. I know that there are changes where some things that were previously possible, say professional services on particular clouds, are now no longer able to be procured that way or no longer able to be offered in the same way because of some of the changes there. So just make sure that you have a look and see whether it's counting towards your committed spends or whatever on the clouds that you use.
Yeah, I think before you do any of these things, it's definitely worth checking with your account rep on both sides to see, is this something that is going to be beneficial to do? Have we already gone over our allotted limit of the amount of stuff that we can procure that's actually going to make a difference to our commitment number? Will we get a better discount by going direct? Because that's often the case when the cloud provider's marketplace is taking a little bit of a cut as well, as thank you for offering the service.
Traditionally, though, those cuts that the marketplaces take, even publicly, are very small. So I think Google and Azure publicly talk about a small percentage that is, less than 5% in their public documentation. And so you're not talking a huge cut, and I expect it's for all the reasons that we just said, right? If you, as a cloud, are building an ecosystem around your cloud, it makes perfect sense. And so they want those sellers to be selling things on the marketplace. One thing I will say, I joked about it before, but if you are buying things through the marketplace, do be very clear that what you're buying is usually a contract with a third party that is procured via that public cloud. And so you do need to check the terms on which you're buying it. It isn't normally a standard contract that your legal has already approved. It is often a separate contract with that third party vendor, and you should be involving your teams and checking that that is something you can commit to.
Actually, that raises a very interesting point, which is that those marketplaces don't always work as seamlessly as you think they will. I have had cases where I have been paying a cloud provider to then pay a third-party provider. It turned out something changed in the third-party provider's billing, so it appeared to me like I was paying from the cloud provider side, but the third party wasn't getting paid, and we ended up losing access to our account because of that. So it can look quite slick and seamless, but sometimes you need to keep on top of things and make sure from the third party's perspective that everything is okay. Because we were shocked when CI stopped working one day. And if you want to work out how much you want to spend with Datadog, just get some sort of psychic with the shiniest crystal ball and your way.
Yeah, Datadog's pricing is sometimes prohibitively expensive, and they're known for that. But I have used them before, and they're worth the money, especially when it comes to things like tracing and knowing what services are talking to which other services, and just to click through them all and then see, a heap stack of a live running service at any given time. That kind of information is and insight is just incredibly valuable.
Yes, at previous roles, I've found expensive bugs exclusively because we were using some of Datadog's tracing, and being able to dig down the stack of a PHP app with a pretty terrible ORM layer unearthed some interesting issues that we would never have found otherwise. So yes, it's good, but pricey.
On the flip side, they do have a terrible Lego. Just putting that out there.
Why are you hating on a dog, man?
What kind of dog has a graph in its mouth?
A Datadog!
One that ate my homework.
I don't want it to eat my data. I want it to present it to me.
The page isn't ripped.
Not yet, it's not. You've clearly never owned a dog.
No.
So that's probably a sensible place to wind things up. Before we do, just a quick thank you to all those people who sent in feedback. It's been great to receive, and please do keep it coming. If you've got questions or feedback, please send it in to show@hybridcloudshow.com. I'd also like to say a quick thank you to those people who support us. If you'd like to join those people, you can at hybridcloudshow.com/support, where for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an ad-free feed of either just this show or all the Late Night Linux family shows, and sometimes you receive episodes early. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.